Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. Back at full strength again this week with Deena back on the podcast, along with Samantha and Madeline Fata. A few new things to update since last week's podcast. But first, everyone have a good weekend.
Yes, great weekends.
And then Samantha had a great morning, right? Now, new homeowner, happy homeowner.
Yes, thank you. I'm very excited.
Congratulations on that. That's fun.
Yes, I'm officially in Lansing forever and ever now.
Well, I have
Deena, we can't hear you.
I have two left hands, so I'm sorry I can't do any home improvements. My wife will attest to that. So I can't help you out there. But I know some great people you can hire to do it if you need it.
Perfect. I can't do it either. So,
all right. Well, while Deena works on her tech side of things, why don't we go ahead and get started? First up, an issue that we talked up a little bit last week, the aggregate mining bills. Madeline, you want to give us a brief update on that, on where things are at on that?
Yeah, so there was legislation introduced late last week. I think it came out on Thursday. It's essentially taking away all the regulating authority for sand and gravel mining operations away from locals and putting it in the hands of the state, which is just a very dangerous step toward this local preemption that we're hearing so much about in Lansing. But the bills are in committee tomorrow. They will be in the House Regulatory Reform Committee at 10:30. We sent out a phone to action campaign to all our members to oppose it. We are signing on to a coalition letter also opposing it with the Township Association, the Municipal League, SEMCOG's on the letter, a bunch of environmental groups, school boards are opposed to it. I mean, this is a big issue and we're hitting them from all sides.
Yeah, it comes down to a local control issue, something that's up to locals now to decide, and basically going to turn that authority over to the state. Do you know the cadence of the bills? Are they just doing committee hearings tomorrow? Are they going to take a vote tomorrow? Do you know yet?
I don't, but I'm going to anticipate they're moving them. So far this term, they've been moving bills quickly. Traditionally, it's 1 week of testimony. Following week, they vote them out, but that hasn't really been the pattern this term. They've been doing testimony and votes all in one swift movement.
So I have a quick question, Madeline, or just for, those who are watching and listening. We've been dealing with this aggregate issue for a couple of sessions now, and we've had different versions of the bills introduced, but this one seems to be even more, I probably shouldn't use the word draconian, but I'm going to, by taking absolutely everything away from the locals. We had gotten close to some agreements last year, but this year, do you think there's any chance on amending it or scaling it back, at least in the House?
So it was 2 years ago, or 2 terms ago, excuse me, it was in 2019, there was a version by Senator Ollier that was workable. It was much more palatable. It essentially said you can't zone these mines out of existence entirely. Locals will still have say over sound levels, hours of operation, that type of thing. But yeah, this version is locals won't have any say whatsoever. The Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, as we call it, EGLE, will have full control. They'll work directly with the aggregate industry, cut the locals out of the conversation entirely.
Yeah, something obviously that's we've long opposed any sort of preemption of local control. So thanks for tracking that, and we'll make sure to keep everyone updated as it moves through the process. Next up, Samantha, you want to talk to us a little bit about the juvenile justice legislation and where we are with that?
Yes, thank you, Steve. Juvenile justice bill package that we've talked so much about and I've been working on since I started last August is going to see the light of day this week and should be introduced on Thursday in the House. It's going to be about 22 bills. And per Representative Hope's office, she's the chair of the House Criminal Justice Committee. They plan to have a hearing next Tuesday, the 16th. So MAC, the sheriffs, prosecutors, a coalition of stakeholders are all in support of this package and will be there Tuesday. I'd love to testify if given the opportunity, but as Madeline mentioned, you know, we've been seeing a lot of bills go fast tracked through the committee process. So I don't believe that's the intent with this package. I think we'll have the traditional hearing and then report them out of committee the following week. But for us, it's not the worst thing in the world if they push these bills through pretty quickly, being, you know, our strong support and the child care fund reimbursement increase as a part of that. So for now, the House is ahead in that package. Don't have a date yet for when they'll be introduced in the Senate, but next week should be our first hearing.
That's good. That's great news. Nice to see something moving on that. Obviously, a statewide need there that we've been talking about for a long time. All right. Finally, on legislative issues that we wanted to update on, binding arbitration is back up. Madeline, Deena, do you guys want to talk to that a little bit? It's something that's come up almost every legislative session I can remember for the past 10 or so years. So nothing new that we've seen. Our position hasn't changed over those 10 years. But Madeline, you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's Representative Kelly Breen has introduced this legislation. It will expand binding arbitration beyond police and firefighters and to our county corrections officers. Like you said, we've opposed it for a long time. It's costly, it's time consuming. You're once again cutting locals kind of out of the conversation and putting that negotiating power into a third party arbitrator's hands. That is also up in committee tomorrow morning. We're going to get a phone to action campaign out as soon as we're done with this podcast here. So hopefully we can reach some people before that hearing. We're going to submit a card of opposition, but unlike years previously, this one might have legs. This legislature seems to really favor unions and these bargaining units. So this one might actually move through the process.
Yeah, something we go ahead, Deena. Sorry.
Oh, I'm just going to say that, yeah, we've been struggling with this for a very long time. This is just, it expands it to like your corrections officers in the jails, where traditionally binding arbitration, you know, back up a little bit. So when you're negotiating with your labor unions, normally you can, you know, just fight it out and come to an agreement. Well, with police and fire unions, they have the ability to say, we don't agree on these things. And the employer says, we don't agree on these things. And so they go to a third party arbiter, they determine like all of those different scenarios. So whether it's more vacation days or greater protections for the union or a different multiplier for their retirement benefits. And so that third party arbiter decides those. And, you know, sometimes it ends up in our favor and sometimes it ends up in the union negotiators' favor. So, you know, for those groups. But, you know, the problem with this is that at the end of the day, if they're negotiating things that are going to be long-term liabilities for us and make, you know, the arbiters deciding on greater awards than necessarily that county is planning on into the future, then that creates, again, more future unfunded liabilities that we have to figure out how to fund and manage. And so it takes those decisions out of the employer's hands on what they can afford and what they can't afford. And on top of that, it also creates angst with the other labor unions within that county, because now you've got, you know, a third party making decisions on certain things that are not going to be applicable to the other bargaining groups within the county. So yeah, we've been fighting it forever. So, you know, sorry, Madeline, I've kind of worked on that for a long time before you got here, but it's difficult, but she's right. I mean, the bills passed out of the House last legislative term, and died in the Senate only because we had people who were, you know, staunchly opposed to the expansion. This term, I'm afraid we're not going to have as strong of advocates on our side of the negotiation. So kind of think it's going to happen.
Yeah, obviously, when you have a third party arbitrator or whoever deciding some of those things, they may not have the full perspective of where the county is financially and making decisions that can impact it long term. So that's obviously a major concern there. And as we're talking all about these pieces of legislation, there's an interesting scenario developing with this legislative session, specifically due to the budget and immediate effect and how that budget can, or when that budget would go into effect, should there not be immediate effect granted. Typically, when a budget's done, immediate effect is granted, the budget's done, boom, good, October 1st, we got a budget, let's go. Different scenarios kind of shaping up right now. Deena, you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different in the House than in the Senate, but bills that make it all the way through and get signed by the governor do not go into effect until 90 days after sine die. Usually the legislature ends their session in late December, and then it's 90 days after that before, the bills that did not get immediate effect, become enacted and, applicable. But a lot of the time you'll see, especially with public policy that doesn't take a long time to prep for implementation, just granting immediate effect on most items. Well, the House usually gavels on immediate effect, meaning that they don't have to have a record roll call vote. And they say, oh, yeah, immediate effect granted, and they just assume that it happened. In the Senate, they have more of a backstop, and they need a 2/3 majority to grant immediate effect on legislation. And with the breakdown in House Republican or Senate Republicans versus Senate Democrats, they need a significant number of Republicans in order to vote for immediate effect. Well, we've heard that the Republicans aren't really in favor of some of these budget decisions that have been made, and they've threatened to not grant immediate effect in the Senate. If that happens, this is all kind of not set in stone. We don't know if they're going to do this or not. So let me say that. But if they do decide to withhold immediate effect, then the budget, if we don't adjourn sine die, would not go into effect until March. Well, the state budget year starts October 1st. So what that means is the legislature would be forced to adjourn sine die sometime in June in order for the budget to go into effect 90 days later, or by the beginning of the state's fiscal year, which is October 1st. That's what we're kind of facing right now if they don't grant immediate effect.
Yeah, so then they would adjourn, let's say June 30th. Budget would go into effect in October. What happens the rest of the year?
Well, they won't meet then while they're adjourned sine die. Okay, that means that no bills get introduced, legislature doesn't come to town, there's no point in it.
Can
Now,
committees
what-
meet?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I don't know. I'd have to figure that out. I don't know. Maybe I would assume they could, but I'm not sure. So I don't know. The governor can call a special session though. So the governor can say, hey, we're gonna, the legislature can adjourn sine die on June 15th. The governor can call a special session on, July 10th if she wanted to. Now it's unclear yet, because this is pretty unprecedented. Unclear as to whether or not she will call them in for very specific reasons or for a specific amount of time. I don't know. I think that we still will have to wait to see how that shakes out, but it does make for a very interesting year and a little bit frustrating for us because we have lots of policy bills that we're trying to get through for our members. And if, they're adjourned sine die and gone for a significant amount of time, that really ties our hands.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts there. Obviously, a lot of things can change between now and when the budget's passed. When it's passed, the timing of that getting passed could have an effect on that as well. And we talked a little bit about that last week on the time frame that the legislature is shooting for on that. We've already heard a little variation starting on maybe a little less aggressive schedule on getting the budget passed than they originally anticipated. So, but still an interesting scenario that could occur. new times, new things can happen. And, it's a little bit of a political chess match now, I think, between the Republicans and Democrats on, offering immediate effect or not, and sine die and not. And let's do a quiz between Deena, Madeline, and Samantha. Say your name to buzz in first. What is the definition of sine die?
Oh, I just saw it too. No
Great.
more days or end of,
Close. Without any future.
yeah, Steve
meeting
Googled
being
it, mind
designated.
you. I
No, I didn't.
guarantee, yeah, oh,
It's all up here.
baloney, you so Googled
All
it.
up here. This is like a trap for information. But yeah, that's what that means. Without date, or very simply.
No
met.
more days,
but-
yeah.
But anything else from anyone as before we wrap up here? All right, well, great, everyone. Thank you. Great information. We appreciate everyone tuning in, and we will be back next week to provide another update. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.